Have you seen the fountain at Lake Eola? It's huge! Check out this lady's head. It's huge! Lake Eola swan boats are incredible. They're huge! Did you know there's almost a mile of walkway around Lake Eola? It's huge! Have you seen the feet on this guy? They're huge! Did you know that a swan's bill is larger than a duck's bill? That's huge! Have you seen the trees at Lake Eola? They're huge! Lake Eola bandshell, it's huge!
Visit Lake Eola. It's huge!
Have you seen the head on this guy? It's little. It's not really that big.
Let's see. What? Oh no! Flushable wipes! Trash it! Don't splash it!
So we are really focused on affordable housing in Orlando and Central Florida, and I think I could probably call it now our biggest and most crucial and most vexing issue. But we're committed to ensuring that every person, regardless of economic status, should have access to safe and affordable housing. Some of the units here will be held for those who have experienced homelessness, and a certain percentage is set aside for that, and we have committed as a community to permanent supportive housing.
I've been waiting for this for weeks. I gotta tell you, I am so ready to do this. I even have the bed ready. What? So when you get home, we can get really dirty.
Good morning, Commissioners. This morning we're going to have our first budget workshop for the 18-19 fiscal year, and fortunately some of the decisions we're making this year are a little easier than they were 3 or 4 years ago when we were having less money. So the economy's good. We're having increased property values and hence a little bit more money, but unfortunately the legislature continues to meet, so they've placed some potential revenue decreasers, I guess, that'll be on the ballot. So we have to be concerned about tax reform and, of course, unfunded mandates, specifically in the area of school resource officers, that is going to impact our budget this year and years in the future. We've been able to make strategic investments with your leadership in all of the districts, and today we're going to have a presentation to see where we stand. I know you've all been individually briefed fairly extensively already, but I think Brian will probably emphasize this is not the budget to be presented. It's a budget that is still in progress. The only decision we need to make in the next few weeks is on our millage rate, which I anticipate we'll be able to maintain at the same level as it was last year. So Brian, take it away.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. So today we're going to go into our budget workshop. Similar to what we've talked about in the past, wanted to touch on kind of the current year, where we're at as far as the adjustment we made throughout the year from the Budget Review Committee, and then get into really the 19 numbers from the general fund side, as well as highlight some other funds, talk about what we have been able to include from department staffing and programmatic enhancements, and then briefly touch on our capital improvement program, as well as some next steps and our budget calendar going forward. So the 18 budget was drafted with the similar situation on property tax revenues. They continued to increase from the recession. We had increased our infrastructure and facility maintenance a few years back. We maintained those levels in this current budget that we're in now. We did increase staffing related to economic conditions. We added 15 police officers and 12 firefighters, and we started with a $3 million contingency at the beginning of the year. So that's the current budget that we're in right now. From a general fund side, it's about $446 million. Other funds, $767, for a total of about $1.2 billion. Wanted to touch on this because recently we've finalized and closed the books for our 17, so we kind of live in 3 worlds in budget development. The current budget, the last year, as well as what we're all developing. We talked about our reserve levels extensively and what it's allowed us to do as a city. So this is just some graphically of how the numbers have played out over time. As you saw, we had kind of an increase of reserves. It's not that we were trying to grow those reserves. We had actually budgeted to use some of those throughout those those years, but we didn't need it. And also, as the recession hit and everything else, our denominator grew for our what we needed to keep on that 25% limit decrease, which changes some of the percentages. But for the last couple of years, we've maintained above 25%. We think we will be in that same ballpark when we end this current year. But there are some drivers related to that. This is those same numbers, but in dollar figures, and kind of see where we're at. So we're talking about above roughly $120 million, or right around there to get to that 25% plus number. Last year we had, in the current numbers that I just presented, we did have some drivers that took it down from our response to Pulse to our response to Matthew while we were waiting to get those reimbursed. So a similar factor may occur in this given fiscal year, and some of those percentages might go down, but we're also making sure we're taking advantage of the way we've structured our 25% reserves from our disaster funding, making sure we can kind of weather those storms. So throughout the year, we don't tend to wait when we need to react to growing needs of our community or changes in the departments, and we try to address those head on with the current resources that are available to us. So we do have an extensive budget review committee that meets pretty much monthly or periodically for that point to take advantage of both the staffing side of the house as well as the funding side. So during the current year, to set the tone or kind of set the baseline for some of these numbers, we've been able to accomplish. We funded and set up a new Children Affairs division to provide a greater focus on programming and activities. We funded some maintenance improvements at Park of Americas. We added some transportation improvements in the multi-use trail projects from federal, state, and local, roughly about $6 million. From impact fees to the Shingle Creek Trail, Urban Trail, we recognize the state revolving fund for a wastewater project down at Iron Bridge, and we had some stormwater projects in the Lake Davis, Greenwood, Interconnect, and Oregon Street area. So these were all things that were not crafted in the original budget, but were things that we addressed throughout the middle of the year from a programmatic standpoint. On staffing, the biggest one that I wanted to point out, because we had actually built in some contingency and knew this was going to come down. If you remember, very late in the budget development process last year, the COPS program, and we thought the city was going to be able to take an opportunity of that. So we had 15 COPS funded officers that we were able to do through the budget review committee and recognize some of the reimbursement from the feds. As again, staffing was related to that Children Affairs division. There was a permitting reorganization in the building code fund that added some positions. And then more recently, we added 35 positions related to the EMS civilian transport side and in the EMS fund. Another thing that's been ongoing throughout this year that I wanted to touch on was we kind of announced it later in the year last year with investing in our neighborhoods, a bond program. Recently, City Council approved up to $80 million for a future program and reimbursement allowance. Progress continues both at the staff level, at our consultants, our development partners. So this program, while it's not directly included in these budget numbers as it is kind of a capital program, you have been approving an item here, an item there, design contract. I think we had some pre-construction activities. We had some site improvements. So all of these projects that are listed on the screen are still moving forward. And I think in the coming months, you'll see a lot more activities related to actually letting some of the major contracts that are related to these projects. So that was a big component, but that's not really worked into a lot of these numbers that you'll see ahead.
I'm enjoying this picture-in-picture technology.
Yeah.
You ever did that? That's great.
Yeah. Not sure how I feel about it. So moving into to the general fund, as the mayor talked about, this is a little bit different than I think in some of the years past. That this is a working budget. It's something that the departments have spent a lot of time on, and the Office of Management Budget kind of vetting some of the numbers and trying to develop something that we can bring before you. But it is not the final budget. There's still we usually like to take a look at what the state revenue estimates come in at. Most of the time our numbers are a little more conservative, and we don't plan on growth that isn't here yet, but that is already here when we're doing our revenue estimates. KPMG works through our cost allocation plan, and they're still in the final touches of that, as well as we're reviewing water reclamation and solid waste rates, and then really just any additional programming or staffing changes that these conversations and these continued conversations with the mayor and commissioners that you have, we want to make sure that we take those into consideration when we're working through this budget. So these are preliminary numbers, but I think they're in a really good place to both deliver from the revenue side as well as to address the needs of our community. As the mayor touched on, we are seeing about a $42 million increase from the current adopted numbers. So this is not any of those BRCs, but this is, I'm taking you all the way back to what we started last summer when we adopted our October 1 numbers for 18. We adopted 446, and now we're going up to 488. As you'll see, the property taxes, the top line is about 11% increase, at almost $20 million, our largest driver. I'm going to get into some of the other drivers in a little bit, but I want to touch on property taxes first. I have a few slides because we get, I think, the most questions after these numbers get put out there from the people calling our office to just the general public. So, as you see from the trend lines, the property taxes pretty much has been the same story for the last few years. It's about that same growth, so there's nothing, we're happy that we're still in that mode, but it is not much different than kind of the starting place on some of the previous budgets from a property tax standpoint. We've been experiencing that kind of double-digit growth in property tax numbers the last few years. It's still our largest revenue source for the general fund. And one of the things, so these next couple slides, I know most of you are very familiar with how this works, but I wanted to make sure, like I said, we get a lot of questions from the public. So property taxes the taxable value is not determined by the city. We get a lot of questions on that. So it is the Orange County Property Appraisers that is looking at the valuations. Where the city comes in is our millage rate that we're able to set. We actually can go up to 10 mills. The next slide will kind of have some historical of that, but right now we're at 665. We do plan on bringing the millage resolution to y'all at the next meeting in July, and we're proposing to maintain that at that 665. But again, the values that people are experiencing on their homes are increasing, and all that's related to the values that are being set by the property appraiser. Our role in this is to set the millage rate to deliver our services. As you can see from just a history standpoint, and it kind of goes back to those reserve levels that we had in one of the previous slides. But for a few years during the recession, we maintained our rates. We did not increase them. We tried to allow the citizens to keep the most that they could for the longest period of time, to the point where we had a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversations when we went from the 565 to the 665. But that number has been maintained for a few years. Just from a peer city review, we always look at what others are doing. We're still focused on our millage rate to deliver the services we need, but I know we get this question, so we wanted to make sure you were aware. We're kind of still in the middle of the pack. A lot of times you'll hear Tampa and St. Pete in the similar conversations with what they're trying to do as the city. So the fact that we're all kind of right there, I think, says something about the point of where the millage rate is at that 665. The other thing that I wanted to point out, because we get this question a lot, is your total tax bill is not just the city's portion. The city is only roughly, and this is just an average median house value. We just picked one out at 238 with your standard exemptions, the 25 for the schools and the 50 for the other jurisdictions. But we're basically only about 33% of that total tax bill. So we're delivering all of the city's services, from public safety to families, parks and rec to administrative, of all those, with only roughly about 33% of an individual's tax bill. So I think that's something to be said, that we're able to deliver that at that rate. And also, when people talk about the total dollar of their bills, the city's component is a much smaller piece to that total value. As you see from this, the public schools component is the larger value that comes in this. But we talked about this a lot when we were looking at our millage rate a few years back. But when you're talking about a daily cost, you're still looking at less than a cup of coffee for the city's services at the millage rates and at the dollars that are getting delivered. These next slides will relate directly to our our values from our, what they.
Brian, that
Yes.
$3.43, is that based on the 238 value?
Yes. Yes, sorry, yes, sir. So all these are directly related, and we try to do some comparisons to our valuations that we received from the property appraiser from this year to last year. You'll hear a lot about Orange County as a whole, so these are just specific to the city of Orlando. You see our assessed value is at $31 billion. It's increased about $3 billion or 11%. That's similar to, we had a $3 billion, roughly about a $3 billion increase last year as well. Our new construction is almost $1 billion at about $900 million. The next couple of values, I think you touched on it, Mayor, as far as some of the exemptions that have put into place over time. The first initial one, the Save Our Homes, has been in existence for a while, but that essentially is a foregone revenue of about $15 million. The first 25 on the values is about $6 million in lost revenue. The commercials non-home cap is gotten up to about $3.5 billion. It's a loss of about $23 million. The additional 25 results in a loss of 4.9. So when you're talking about the first 25 and the second 25, which is on this normal tax bill, you're talking about the 50 here, is roughly about $11 million in lost revenues. But we have a lot of our properties are at the cap value. So the one thing that I wanted to point out is we did talk a little bit about the new homestead exemption that's on the ballot, and just using some of these figures is trying to figure out where our house values lie. We did a little bit of modeling, and we're looking at another loss of about $3.5 million, give or take, if that ballot initiative passes. Again, based on kind of how this first 25, second 25, these homesteads work on the properties makeup that's within the city's limits. So moving on to some of the other larger revenue sources, because you did see a couple increases. This is the charges for services area. So if you, from earlier in the presentation, sorry. So that one went up roughly about $12 million or 29%. As you can see just from the graphs of the different colors, the biggest one is we're rolling the EMS operation into the general fund. So before they were kind of two separate funds, but they were managed almost as one. Some were in the fire department, some were in EMS transport, but with the new model that we've gone forward with, we're bringing that into the general fund. So just from a number standpoint, that's always been in existence. It was kind of over here. Now it's combined, and that's why we wanted to separate. But just from a total, year to year, there's not a lot of changing in the charges for service area if you take that EMS operation out of this conversation. Intergovernmental and sales and use. As you see, OUC and state sales tax, we are experiencing some growth at the state level from revenue. Both of them are over $2 million all in for these revenue sources, about a $5 million increase. The one thing I did want to point out, though, is they are pretty stable. So when we're talking about year to year, how we're addressing the needs, if we had a large impact or a large change of direction or a new mandate, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of movement in these revenue sources. So we really are looking back at that property tax number from a decision-making standpoint. Other revenue was another one of those. We kind of bring a couple things together, but this one really relates to the OPD off-duty, and that's more of a budgeting and matching to actuals. This is all reimbursed by the people that are getting our OPD officers. So we're really still trying to fine-tune the budget of where that balance is on how many people are utilizing those off-duty services because they're paying the revenue in. So corresponding revenue just means there's a corresponding expense, but so it is changing the numbers here. The other thing that, if you look back at actuals for this other category, if you're looking at any of the numbers, there is an item for an internal loan that we took out related to some debt where we kind of had some one-time coverages of our defined benefit general employees pension. Both of those loans have already been paid off, so we brought the money in, but it's already been paid off from that standpoint, so the general fund is back to whole on those. So those are really our larger revenue streams that I wanted to discuss, and the numbers that we're putting forward again are working numbers for those revenue streams. that we're continue to analyze, continue to work with the departments to fine tune, and continue to take input from both yourselves as well as the state of Florida just on what they're seeing. Moving into the expense side, as you see from a department's perspective, and I'll get into some staffing enhancements and program enhancements a little bit later, but kind of similar as we've talked about in the past, the non-departmental is related to capital, and you'll see that in a minute, and some of the investments we're trying to do in one-time project-oriented capital improvements. And then police is another one of the larger dollar increases. So again, we're focusing our additional revenues on public safety. The pie chart is similar to the breakdown that we've seen year over year, with again, police department, fire department making up over 50% of our general fund departmental budgets. The non-departmental, because we do get this question a lot, essentially is any of the transfers that we're making out to our capital improvement program, as well as the tax increment payments that we're paying into the CRA, as well as a debt service component, make up the bulk of what that 16% is. So it did grow this year based on our desire and our proposal to allocate more towards capital than we have in the past. So general fund expenses by use, again, you'll see salaries and benefits continue to make up the bulk of this. Some of these percent increases, when you're looking at the dollars, they're just based on smaller beginning places that a lot of it, and also we're fine tuning if it was contractual versus supplies versus capital versus others. So we're just we're making sure that we're always working with the departments to how we're actually spending those dollars from what the items that we're procuring, how the contracts are going, and we're doing that analysis every year. So there's some movement in between some of these areas that lend to that. Again, transfers out, as you see, is almost a 60% increase related to the general funds component, and almost the vast majority of that is related to, again, a focus on one-time capital and project needs related to the general fund. So overall, the general fund, even though we received the additional revenues and we have programs, some of those, a lot of the, or roughly about a third of those are on kind of one-time or capital items that we could or could not sustain in future years. Same breakdown, but a graph doesn't look too much different than in the past from a percentage split between our various categories. Again, salaries and benefits, over almost 65% of our money, of our budget when we're talking about the people side of the equation. And there's just some breakouts. The different size, I want to make sure I note the different sizes of each of these blocks are relative to the amounts that are in those. If you're curious. On the benefits detail, we did see an increase in our health insurance, both in the fund, and I want to make sure we talked about this slide because after you look back at the decision that council made and the city has done to go self-insured in health insurance, I think was a very smart decision just purely by the numbers. I think our wellness team and our health care advocates here at the city have done a great job making sure our rates have remained low. If you look at the trend between some of the industry averages to what the city has experienced, even to the point where we had a few years with no increased premium rates, as well as some rebates in a few of those years, it just kind of goes to show what we've been able to do at the city by this focus on wellness. The reason why I wanted to point this out is because this budget does include a premium increase of 5%. But again, that's still significantly less than what the industry is seeing from an average cost increase. And a lot of that is kind of related to the prescription side of the house. So the prescriptions that our makeup at the city are choosing are starting to be more expensive, and just that industry in general is getting to be more expensive. So we'll continue to do all the programs. I think they're doing a fantastic job, but I think just these numbers should, I think, bring council some comfort that was a correct decision and that we've been able to maneuver throughout that industry for a few years. A couple slides, the next slides will kind of touch on some of the other major funds. There is, so from the capital program, which is water reclamation. It supports a $28 million capital program, and as you'll see when we do some comparisons later on, that is less than what we've had the last couple of years, but that does not mean that they are not full throttle on all of their projects. They have over $100+ million in budgeting in projects, and they're moving forward. So just in this given year, the project allocation is at a less amount, but it doesn't mean that we're reducing the operations or we're doing less of some of those projects. We've actually been able to do some of them in the middle of the year, as you saw with some of our focus on the Iron Bridge to that. So it does support a $28 million program. Right now, we don't have a fee increase or anything related to the stormwater. I think that's something that we've talked about a few times that we'll need to look at, because the programmatically, the capital program for that is roughly at about that $4 million-ish range. Again, these are all still working numbers. We're still working through the project mix. The CRA operating fund, as you saw from the general fund's property taxes, the CRA gets their piece of those based on the incremental growth. So they're seeing about a 10% growth, focusing again on Paramore housing initiatives, the project DTO, and then some of the new deployments and new activities that they've done in the affordable housing, as well as the Ambassador and some of the other initiatives that they've encountered. The biggest one that I wanted to know, and I talked about it a couple times, but again, is our capital improvement program is almost doubling. So that's the general fund support of our capital improvement program that you'll see from that standpoint. The parking fund is balanced and includes about $830,000 of capital maintenance or R&R type activities. This is significant because if you recall, last year we changed where the Geico garage sat from a financial reporting standpoint. It was in Orlando venues and it moved over to the parking fund. So these numbers are based on the Geico garage and its associated debt in the parking fund, and they were still able to balance the budget as well as to put capital programs for R&R. So, building code enforcement, they've continued to ramp up from a staffing standpoint. They are projecting to utilize some fund balance in order to balance this budget and to meet the needs of that growing community. Crossing Guard Fund shows an increase, really more related to the additional posts and some of the new school openings, change some of those, the walkability of our students. The Healthcare Fund, as I noted, is increasing. Excuse me. We do have some first-time budgets that we didn't have in last year's adopted with a real estate acquisition kind of strategic fund, as well as our parks impact fee funds. We didn't have those in the adopted budget, and now we're recognize those. And then last point I touched on a little bit, but we're consolidating the EMS transport into the general fund. Similar story, but with numbers and some of the percentages of those larger funds. The other side of the house is experiencing roughly about less than a 1.5% increase in growth, and a lot of that has to do with the various capital program changes, not so much on the operational side of these various funds. So the next slides will touch on kind of how we've proposed or how we're working the increases into the departmental budgets, both from staffing as well as from programmatic standpoints. From a staffing perspective, you'll see the various departments. Overall, as a city, we're growing by about 100 staff is what we're looking at. But again, our per population estimates still remain at that 15-year low. So when you're talking about an expanding population and delivering those services, that 100 employee increase that we're working the page before throughout those departments is still just basically keeping up with what our estimates are purely from this metric that we're talking about here. So the department staffing, you'll see the ones that are italicized are the ones that we did in the middle of the year through Budget Review Committee. The bold numbers, or the bold font, are new positions that we're proposing in this current budget. Police, again, has 23 officers, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, related to school resource officers and our proposal for that, as well as just how adding some additional officers to the streets. The fire department, most of their movements were done through the BRC. They are asking for another civilian manager. Families, Parks and Rec, there's some park maintenance staff and regional recreation coordinators. A lot of this was related to new parks that are coming online, expanded parks, a lot of the growth that's happening down in Lake Nona from a parks perspective, as well as just some additional staff throughout the organization. Office Business and Financial Services, not proposing anything in the new budget, but there was some fleet coordinators that we had done through BRC. Housing Community Development, there's a planner related to affordable housing. This actually just came through Budget Review Committee. We were debating on waiting till the new budget to roll this position, or to include this position, and I think we didn't want that lapse between now and October 1 to affect what we're trying to do in the affordable housing realm. So that we came a little bit earlier, but that is part of this budget, and you'll see you saw it in their numbers from a department's growth standpoint, since they're a much smaller department and mostly funded through grants. When you're talking about general fund support, and this position would be general funded support, for the most part, they did have some growth there, but that was something that was included through mid-year that affects their area's budget. Again, economic development, we continue to see the demands related to the growth and the areas that they're looking at, from plans to permits to code enforcement. So this budget had some mid-year adjustments, as well as in this budget, we are increasing the code enforcement team related to multifamily. There's a new project coordinator for affordable housing, so this will complement the housing and community development department's position and look at it from an economic standpoint, but again on affordable housing. A new assistant city planner division, plans and the amount of information and review that is going through that area has been growing, as well as with, you're talking about permit reviews and development review techs. Executive offices, we've had this program in place for many years, but this budget is elevating it to kind of its own area, and that's the Office of Sustainability. So it would include some additional supply type budgets, but also a support staff member. We've kind of had people within that area across the city in various funding sources, or we've gone out and got grants. So this is kind of taking it to a sustained office level. And then as well, we are adding a position related to smart cities. There's some one-time kind of project dollars associated with smart cities, and this person would be involved in the team that's already kind of been the working group team that's been in place at the city, but again, get a focused staff member related to our smart cities program and initiatives here. Public Works, done through the budget review, and transportation, mostly done through budget review, but did have another enforcement supervisor that they've asked for in transportation. So that's from the staffing perspective. Some of the programmatic enhancements that I'll be talking on will do interact with these staffing, but also there's some that just are dollar amounts. So as we talked about it, there was an increased extra duty budget that was reimbursable. We've expanded our crossing guard locations. We did increase some overtime in communications, as well as the CID. We have some funding for radio equipment maintenance, and then we are funding one of their capital asks was a replacement rifles for officers. So that ask is about $1.5 million that is funded in this budget from those capital dollars. Fire, we have the full funding for the holiday shift differential and all the other items that are in the budget. So just take a step back from the general staffing and how we're dealing with this 19 budget would be year 3 of the agreed upon bargain agreements, as well as what we've committed to our non-bargaining employees. So from a high level, it's 2.5% for those employees. In the fire department budget, we've included what the budget or what the imposed contract was. So the 2.5 for the top and them moving through the steps, those were the assumptions that we put into this budget. So I know we're still working through some of that, but this budget does have those assumptions and those built into the numbers that you're seeing in front of you. In Public Works, we did have some increased dollars related to the litter crews and that side of the house, inmates, and making sure that we're keeping the city beautiful. Transportation, a lot of theirs was related to special events, and they're seeing a big increase in the amount of events that are being requested. So there's some temporary seasonal staff related to managing those, as well as there's the sign and signal shop has some assessments, as well as on the facility side. So we're constantly looking at our buildings around the city for upkeep, for HVAC roofs, those types of initiatives. Sign and signal is one of those that will be getting an assessment we'll be looking at in the upcoming budget. Smart cities I talked about, there are some dollars related to the programmatic front. We put it in transportation, but really it could be in a variety of departments throughout our city. I think a lot of them are connected. This is just kind of where the funding will be housed, but it'll be that staff member as well as our working group that will kind of figure out what that program looks like as we move forward. Families, Parks, and Rec, we did include an increase pay rate for our temporary and seasonal workers. This brings the rest of the department kind of similar to what we've had in some of our federally funded and after-school all-stars programs. So this rate is included in the budget. We do have some increase in supplies and equipment, again, related to some of the new parks and the expansions that we've had around the city. The capital side is growing for Families, Parks, and Rec related to renovations, both at the playgrounds and the recreational centers. For Office of Business Financial Services, most of this focus is on IT and facilities, as well as some building enhancements. So we've increased the IT budget for temporary seasonal, and this really relates to a lot of the deployments that the IT team is having to do related to public safety and just in general across our city. We increased funding for our citywide facilities assessments, as well as our maintenance budgets related to the larger ticket items that the different centers and different facilities around our city need. We did include an initial budget for a real estate acquisition or a strategic fund. As you see from the city council agendas, there's a lot of our real estate group has been pretty busy, both buying and selling and making sure that we're taking advantage when an opportunities exist for whether it's right away or a parcel here or something to get together for one of our larger projects. So this just sets aside some money for us to be able to continue to do that without having to find those buckets of funding. We have our annual budget and include some upgrades for IT as well as IT security. IT security remains a focus of our information technology group. We continue to put our dollars into hardening our system, both the hardware side and the software side. So this just maintains that funding and commitment to making sure that we're keeping all those safeguards in place. There's also some funding for the 9th floor related to conference and training rooms. As you know, we've been shuffling throughout this building. The 9th floor has been a kind of a landing zone. So when this is all said and done, there will be some needs at the 9th floor to get that back to where it can be utilized across the city from all the departments from the training standpoint. So there's some funding here for that as well. On the executive offices front, we did consolidate. This has kind of already happened for the most part from a programmatic standpoint. So this is really just lining up the budget with how the operation is already being run. But consolidation of the Blueprint offices, MBE offices into one budget area. Again, the creation of the Office of Sustainability. We have included an additional increase in funding for each of the district offices related to the operational and capital budgets that are within your purview, as well as with the new records warehouse, and we did include some operational budget increases, very small, related to that for that operation to move. Economic development, again, we have some increased funding related to the vacant lot upkeep and kind of the short-term rental compliance that in our code realm, as well as the creation of a new dedicated multifamily code enforcement team. I think a lot of that will just make sure that there's enough capacity with the regular code operations. I know we've heard a lot from you over the last couple of years. So this increase would allow a lot of dedicated effort here, which should free up some of the resources to be able to maneuver throughout the other code enforcement area. Orlando venues, from a funding standpoint, both of these are general fund supported, but we are including some expansion of Lou Gardens from a parking perspective, as well as some additional lighting improvements at Manello Museum. And the last piece is we've included a kind of a one-time bucket for affordable housing. We're not sure what that program is going to look like. We do have a couple new staff members that will be coming online as they go through the recruitment process of those positions. But we have set aside $1 million related to affordable housing initiatives here at the city, and I think there'll be a lot of dialogue as we go forward. But when we're crafting this budget, we wanted to make sure we set aside some funding for that operation. The last kind of programmatic enhancement that I wanted to touch on was related to the school resource officers. Again, the way we've had a long-standing relationship with Orange County Public Schools. So we try to lay out our current relationship, which is that existing SRO staffing. There's about 29 officers in this program. The total cost, and again, some of these are rounded and averages, but is roughly about $4.8 million. They reimburse us roughly about a third of the cost on that standpoint. So on the current relationship they have, the city is supporting the program at the schools of roughly about $2.5 million. With the new legislation that passed kind of towards the end of session, I think school districts around the state are trying to figure out how they're going to meet those requirements. So they did put just because of our relationship with how we've been currently manning those schools, they did put a request in that would require about 23 new officers. Again, the 2 in high schools, 1 in middle. The big difference is before it was 1 to 4 elementary schools, and now it's 1 to 1. That changes again, the additional ask is about what our current program was. So we're almost doubling that standpoint. The reimbursement rates, we just kept the same for discussion points. So that would be an additional support that we would need to provide for that ask. What we chose to do, or what we presented in this working budget, and I think there's still some dialogue, but is to not fully meet that ask by adding FTEs, but by doing some makeup of an operational kind of effort between backfill overtime, but that we did add specific FTEs in this budget. So we're proposing 15 FTEs related to that increase. So as you saw earlier on one of the slides, we did have 23 officers, new FTEs that we're proposing in this working budget, or that are included in this working budget, but 15 of them will be directly related to the school resource officer, and 8 of them are additional officers. Again, that's just the breakdown that we've kind of put together to get these numbers into the working documents. I think there's still some conversations that will be had as we move forward and into the future. But the city, purely financial, is supporting this program at the schools with OPD's force. So we wanted to make sure you had some of the numbers to put behind that. The last few slides I had are related to our capital improvement program. And again, the program is decreasing. A lot of that, like you'll see, is from water reclamation. And again, this is not that they're reducing their operation. They have $100+ million in projects that are going around and going through the design, the construction phases, all. So this is just kind of managing the ebbs and flows of those projects. But the bigger one is the almost doubling of our capital improvement program. Again, that's general fund dollars that we're putting towards additional equipment for police and fire, additional parks and recreational renovations, facility improvements, additional energy efficiencies across of those buildings, the real estate acquisition, and the affordable housing realm. We're all kind of in those one-time buckets that we've been talking about. So our program goes from 93 to 81, but again, a lot of the same emphasis, if not increased emphasis, when you're talking about the projects that are going around throughout the city. Just a breakdown of some of the functions that we include, again, that gets you back to that 81. This is similar to some of the breakdowns that we've had in the past. So I wanted to talk about kind of next steps and where we're at. Again, these are working numbers. We look forward to additional dialogues. But as I pointed out earlier, we wanted to present something in a working fashion that was balanced. I think we have a good sense of our revenues. It doesn't mean they can't be fine-tuned. I think we have a good sense of our expenditures. Again, there's some fine-tuning that we can do there. But at this point, we at least are at a point where we can say the numbers work. We have 0 at the bottom, and we're fully balanced from that perspective. So as we move forward, again, we've had a few briefings that we related to July. We've been talking about you guys really nonstop from the last budget. Every year we kind of have these conversations and we say, well, what did we go back as a group and say, what did we talk about last year? What did we include? What didn't we include? What did the departments look at? So continuing that dialogue. Again, this is the first workshop on the 9th. July 23rd, the next council, there is an agenda item that would vote on the tentative millage rate. We're proposing to keep all those the same as they are. You'll hear from the mayor and the state of the city budget address that will outline a few of the priorities on the first week in August. We'll continue to meet with all of you throughout the month of August to essentially get a budget that we can finalize for those the first public hearing the first week in September as required by the trim process. So I know I went pretty quickly through a big set of numbers, lots of graphs. Again, the amount of work, I want to applaud our departments. It always impresses me when we go to them and we ask them about their numbers, that they can tie the programmatic side to those numbers. When we're going to them, a lot of times the budget team is going, well, why did this increase $1,000, or why did this change $10,000? And they can take those numbers and translate into, well, we did this program differently, or we went to this center, and that it's a comfort to know that these numbers are vetted before they even get to the financial shop, as well as when we're putting them together. So, but again, here's the presentation for the working budget for 19, as well as where we're kind of at for 18.
Thank you, Brian. Very good job, and thanks to the team. I will point out that in years past, I had done a budget address on the day we adopted the proposed millage rate, and last year we wrapped the state of the city together with a budget address, and that seemed to work pretty well for everybody. One speech instead of two. So we're going to do that again this year. So we'll adopt the millage rate and then lay out some priorities that first week of August. All right, questions, comments?
I have a comment.
Commissioner Ings.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian, you did an excellent job. Do you need to take a potty break or anything?
Good.
You're good.
Thank you, Commissioner.
But I just want to say, when we got down to page 22 in this presentation, dealing with the school resource officers, my heart just really got very happy there, because to see us go from 0.25 in the elementary school for an officer, in other words, 1 to 4 or 5 schools that an officer takes care of, and now we're at 1 and 1 for each elementary school. This has been 12 years that I've been talking about this as an issue that we really needed to do to protect our students and staff and faculty there at each one of the elementary schools. So I just want to say thank you. This is a very good report, very comprehensive, and easy to go by too. So you guys have done a great job. Chris, might as well give it up, because Brian is leading the way. Thank you.
Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Mayor. And I too agree that we need more school resource officers, but one of my frustrations is, again, it's an unfunded mandate from the state, because here we're told that we can't do anything about guns, we can't do anything about gun safety, but yet we have to provide at the city level the amount of security that's necessary to secure our schools. So I just don't think that's fair. I think that the state should be kicking in more for that. If they want to allow people to have willy-nilly guns everywhere and we have to protect our kids, the state should not be doing unfunded mandates on us as municipalities. I just think that's wrong. And I would be remiss if I would not represent my constituents and give my annual "We Need More Money for Brick Street Repairs" address. I appreciate the fact that Lake Davis, because they again came back again and again and again and fussed because their streets were in such disrepair, and started posting on social media how bad their streets were. And I appreciate the fact that we're doing Oregon Street as well, but I think we just, instead of neighborhoods having to come to us and shame us into doing the right thing, that we should be putting ongoing Brick Street and street repairs, because that seems to be the #1 complaint of people, for services in our city, and that we need to have direct funding for that every year, to be able to make those repairs, because it's embarrassing when people talk about the potholes in Orlando. We're the city beautiful, but we can't fix our streets. So and again, I'm not fussing at they're doing the best they can with the limited funding they have, but I do think that we do need to increase that budget for street repairs. And that's all I had, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stewart.
Good. Pardon me. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Commissioner Sheehan, because that's one of the issues that we get, I would guess, probably a regular complaint on, is the condition of our streets, not only in terms of potholes, but also in terms of their attractiveness. So I'll talk with you a little bit. We talked a little bit about that last week. One of the concerns I have about the school resource officers, and I'm not sure I quite understand what you put in here, but I think you put in an estimate of what they said, what the county said they would reimburse us for, or has the county confirmed that?
So the estimate that we have here for the 40,000 is related to our current agreement that we have in place. So we just use the same numbers that
okay.
they're funding our current program at to.
So we don't have any assurance yet of that because they haven't adopted their budget, but we just use that as the same programmatic extension.
Let's just say we're having ongoing discussions.
Good.
Byron's been leading those along with the chief. We think it's a little unfair in terms of the reimbursement rate, and it's great that we're going to have an officer in every school, but legislature, if they want to mandate that, probably ought to pay for it.
Well, and the other concern I have is the role of the OCPS police versus our officers on the same location. So they're funding the police, and so now the question is, what should they be doing on their own?
Byron or Chief, one of you want to get up?
And then the last question as you come up is timing. Are we planning on doing this fall?
Thanks, Commissioner. So the first question as far as Orange County Public School Police, they really don't have the staffing to supplement all those schools, and I don't think there's any immediate plans to do that. To give you an example, they really haven't hired the staff. They have some lieutenants and some sergeants in place. Some of those are staffing schools out in Winter Garden. Winter Garden Police Department doesn't staff those schools, so they're doing that. So they're really not, we work very well with them together, so that's not an issue. And obviously we can't hire 23 police officers by the start of the school year, so we're going to do what we did at the end of this last school year, is fill those positions with overtime or extra duty and use some of that money that we're reimbursed to compensate us for those overtime costs.
So we plan on having additional staff starting this school year?
That is the plan. There'll be an officer at every single school on the first day of school.
Okay. Good. Thank you. The other question while I've got you is that one of the biggest complaints I get about the schools is the traffic around there. Is it a way to have those OSAM officers address some of that traffic issues around the school?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
No problem.
All right, thank you very much.
Other questions?
Yeah, one other question is, and I've got a lot of small things, Brian, to cover with you, but in the staffing on page 18, we see an increase of staffing of 110. And I was trying to correlate that to page 19, which has got the departmental staffing. So is the assumption that the staffing that we have from 18 to 19, is that only the difference of the new staffing? Or is that accumulative of what people that we have not yet staffed for this current year?
So the table is showing what was adopted versus what is working. So any of the BRC changes, as well as the new proposed staffing members, would be in that 110 increase.
Okay. So out of the current year budget, some of the BRC changes could be in there?
Would be in that, yes.
Okay, because when you total up the new...
I mean, when you're, big ones that would be in that number is your EMS transport is roughly 35 positions that would be in that 110 number, as well as the OPD cops, the ones that we did through BRC, would be in that 110.
For the current year and the next year?
The current year adjustments mid-year and the next year's budget are in there 110, yes.
All right, I
Yes,
just took all your bold numbers and added those up, and they don't come up to the 110. And then the last question I've got really is around the economic development. The commitment we've made to upgrade electronically the permitting and the code enforcement, and to combine all those together. Where is that funding? Is that in this current year funding, or is that in the future year funding? I know we made an investment over 2 or 3 years to bring that into line and put all that together.
So as far as the system side or the capital side, that's been funded through previous budgets as well as the current budget. There's, to my knowledge, not any additional software side. So this is more about the staffing and programming operations. This is not the EDIS system that we've been talking about.
Thank you. Great job, guys. And Mayor, would it be appropriate to recognize the staff that's here and the work that they've done?
I was going to do that just at the end.
Okay, all right, perfect.
Commissioner Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian, we've already spoke about the school resource, and I support that, but I coincide with the mayor and Commissioner Sheehan said, and I know that you all are working that out. But while you're in discussion with OCPS, Byron or Brian, I would like for you all to speak with them about the impact fees of affordable homes, single-family homes that they're charging us, that we have to pass on to the homeowner, and to where it makes it unaffordable now when the homeowner have to incur the charges of about $15,000. I know the CRA is absorbing that, and our housing department is, but there is a clause where they can make it exempt for affordable homes, and the more that we continue to build single-family homes, I would hope that they would work with us in that area. I know that was off the cuff, that wasn't spoken, but it is very important. And there was something, and it's personal to me, it occurred a few weeks ago, and I don't see it here, and we can't seem to find out about these $10 fees that are tow trucks are charging for every tow that's done in the city. So if we can find where that pot of money is, I think it's under ordinance that was passed in 2013, and no one can find those $10, and that's a lot of $10 we're missing.
So this budget does include the fees related to what the departments are able to charge under our current under our ordinances, and there is some towing related budgets there, but I know we've been kind of working those numbers out the last couple of years as well, but they should just go roll into the normal general fund area that gets then reallocated out across the general fund departments. So on one of the charges for services slide, one of the boxes was department charges, so that's police fees, fire fees, FPR fees, something like that that has an ordinance established should be in that budget ballpark.
Excuse me?
And just to let you know, so we've spoken with George McGowan Audit about having them audit that as well, just to ensure that those $10 are indeed coming to the city. So it's it'll be on their next work plan.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Here you guys.
Yes, Mayor.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't remember seeing such a comprehensive, as Commissioner Inks mentioned, and thorough budget presentation as the one you did today. So congratulations. That was very well put together, Brian. It was fast, but it was really well done. So thank you for that. Thank you also for coming and discussing some of the new changes. I'm excited to see all this is happening. But it's fair to ask what has been, in order for us to be able to explain to the public why this changes, what has been the change in population for the past couple of years? Do we have any of that information in the city of Orlando? Have we increased in population? Because that's what merits these all those changes that we're talking about.
Actually, the estimate came out just maybe 2 weeks ago. I think we were at 283, if I remember right, with an was that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and in one of the other handout, the budget and brief handout on page 13, it talks about some of our population. And again, the 19 budget is based on the estimates. Traditionally, we've seen that the estimates are low when we actually get back to the actuals, so we may even experience more than that 283 number.
Well, it's very fair to say that for the past years we have been working with, we have done a lot with very little, and it's time for us to upgrade some of these services that we have, and I'm so excited to see the increase in personnel, because God knows that we need code enforcement officers, that we need in economic development, we need we need family parks and recreation. I mean, in every department we need more personnel. So this is great to hear that we are allocating new personnel and that we have been able to balance this budget. In terms, when you were explaining about the police department, there was something I wasn't very clear about. Page 13, when you were talking about other revenues, and the graphic where it talks about the increase in other revenues is being driven primarily by OPD off-duty reimbursement. Do you care to maybe it's me, but do you care to review that one and tell me exactly what you mean by that?
Yeah, we can touch on it and we can get into more detail if I don't answer your question here. But so the OPD off-duty program is run through the city's payroll. So the expenses are hitting our expense side of the equation, and then it gets reimbursed on the revenue side. So we have to recognize it in both places. And this is just, we're still fine-tuning how many people are going to use our program, what levels are going to use it. So these numbers just fluctuate a lot. And we were kind of keeping the revenue assumptions lower, so you were getting these expenses because they're using the program, and we weren't giving the full revenue recognition, whereas this is trying to get the revenue more in line with what the experience factor is.
I see what you're saying, but that's more a in-house adjustment that we need to do in order to.
Correct, since we have to have a balanced budget,
Okay.
expenses to revenues. If we're having the expenses, we need to recognize the
Okay,
revenues.
let's just make sure the public, when they see this, they don't
Yes.
get all confused, so, good, thank you. Good to hear about, so we have 5 new code enforcement officers coming? Isn't that what I?
3 in the new. I'm getting my help back here. So we have 3 officers, a supervisor, and support staff. So that's the 5 new enforcement team.
Okay. One last item in terms of law enforcement, and Chief, I'm so glad you explained that because it's my understanding, and I don't know if I'm totally clear about this, that one of the reasons why the OCPS came up with this new police department was because some of the information that they wanted to learn about situations that are any given point in time arise from any circumstances in the schools, they weren't able to get certain information because it was law enforcement protected. Therefore, they created this new police department mainly to have somebody where police can convey information to police. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, you're correct. So one of their functions is to get information and share information with the Orlando Police Department and other agencies that they share schools with.
So I don't think it was ever the intention for them to create an actual department in order to fulfill the positions that we were occupying before. It's mainly administratively in order for them to be able to process the information.
Yeah, we've asked them several times what their plans were because it's what it seemed like. They were hiring management staff and then supervision. So we thought that naturally the next step would be to hire all these officers, but that hasn't happened yet, and they won't really tell us their plans. But there's no plan that I'm aware of to staff schools with Orange County Public School employees.
Well, thank you, sir. I just want to make that clear because a lot of people are asking the same question, just like Commissioner Stewart was at. People think that they're creating a police department, but if my understanding is just administratively in order for them to be able to get some of the information that they have not been able to attain due to the fact that they don't have any certified personnel in there.
That's how they function right now. But I do say they do have several of their officers actually staffing schools out in Winter Garden.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. That's it, Mayor. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Gray, you have anything? You know, I do, Mayor, but I'm going to wait because this is the first blush, and so let me work with staff on some of them. But don't worry, Brian, I'll be back.
I have something again, Mayor.
Commissioner Hill.
It's for Chief Mina. It's somewhat sensitive, I apologize, but I got to ask, as we're hiring these 23 new officers to go into schools, that I think we have to be somewhat sensitive of who we place in the schools. My only concern is I do want to make sure that the children are safe, but of course, I want to make sure that kids aren't being constantly arrested, you know, and it is a concern in the inner city about over-policing in schools and arrests for discipline problems that the school should resolve versus officers, and it's not open.
Absolutely. All of our officers that are selected will go through our school resource officer training as well as crisis intervention training. And then part of that is our overall philosophy on juveniles, and that where if you remember we shifted a few years back by offering juvenile civil citations in lieu of arrest, and our juvenile arrest numbers have significantly greatly decreased over the past several years, where our civil citations have increased, and we work very well with Orange County Public Schools to ensure that administrative matters are handled just like that with in-school punishment. As you know, there are times when the police just don't need to get involved. So we're on the same
And you're doing,
page.
and our officers are doing a great job at that. I just want to reassure those
Absolutely.
that might be listening that we do have something in place that we're working with the schools with.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, Brian, you want to recognize staff? Recognize your staff?
Sure.
He's been working so hard for us.
Yeah, as we even saw during the presentation, you know, when you get into those levels of numbers, these are the experts, so they definitely deserve kudos. So I'm just going to start with the back, if you just stand as I call your name. So we got Ricky Vanderhoff, we got Jason Wojciewicz, Carmen Raznik, Kevin Pierre, Anthony Belizio, and then Mr. Martin Carmody helps lead this group. So.
Okay, great job.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That'll conclude our workshop for today.